Welcome back. Today, we are diving into a really fascinating explainer. We're looking at a text that blends intricate macroeconomics with, well, esoteric spiritual revelations. It's an incredibly unconventional diagnosis of modern economic stagnation, focusing heavily on Japan, but with massive global implications. Basically, we are exploring a book that claims to offer economic salvation not from living scholars, but straight from the spiritual realm. The source material we're looking at today is a book called Economics of Future Creation. And the critique we are about to unpack? Well, it comes through what the author describes as a channeled spiritual message. The spirit delivering this message is none other than Nobel laureate and champion of free markets, Friedrich Hayek. The text presents a dialogue where Hayek's spirit diagnoses the ailments of the modern economy. We're going to unpack this impartially to understand exactly what this highly unique text is actually arguing. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. Warning from Hayek's spirit. 2. Big government and freedom's death. 3. The hubris of planned economies. 4. Spiritual truths regarding Keynes and Marx. 5. True cause of the subprime crisis. And finally, 6. Protect the value of freedom.
Section 1. Warning from Hayek's spirit.
Now, you might be wondering why listen to a spirit in the first place. Well, according to the source, Hayek's soul now possesses a much broader perspective than he did when he was actually alive. The book argues that just tinkering with minor policy adjustments, that's not going to save us. Instead, we have to examine the very foundation of modern politics and economics. This spiritual vantage point supposedly allows Hayek to see the long-term, devastating consequences of our current economic systems.
Section 2. Big government and freedom's death.
And this brilliantly illustrates the dangerous progression the text outlines. It starts with this idea of a utopian welfare state, a government promising it's going to take care of absolutely everyone. But here's the catch. To fund that, the state has to impose heavy taxation. The text argues that stripping away people's economic resources literally strips away their choices, leading directly to a loss of freedom. Ultimately, the book warns that this dependency paves a direct road to totalitarian oppression. The state becomes absolute, and the individual just becomes powerless. To really drive this point home, the text offers a pretty stark historical warning. It argues that trading your personal freedom for government dependence is a well-worn path to disaster. The source specifically points out that totalitarian regimes don't always take power by force, right? Sometimes they're actually invited in. It cites the democratic rise of Hitler's Nazi Party as an example of how people, totally willing to hand over their freedom to a state that promises to fix everything, can accidentally vote themselves right into a totalitarian nightmare.
Section 3. The hubris of planned economies.
So the book essentially contrasts two completely different worldviews here. On the left side, we have the hubris of planned economies. The text argues that big government relies on the sheer arrogance of an elite few who actually believe they can perfectly manage something as complex as a national economy. And on the right, the text advocates for a return to Adam Smith's principles, which represents humility. It's the recognition of the strict limits of human comprehension. The source asserts that no small group can possibly understand the needs of millions, and trying to do so, well, it always ends in oppression. Section 4. Spiritual truths regarding Keynes and Marx. According to the source, Karl Marx is currently facing a really dire spiritual diagnosis. The text defines a place called the realm of unconsciousness, which it describes as a hellish state of total isolation. The book claims that Marx's theories of class struggle were really just a grand self-justification for his own poverty and envy. Because his materialistic philosophy led so many astray, the text asserts that his spirit is now sealed away in this coffin-like isolation, completely unable to interact with anyone else. And get this, the text makes an equally startling claim about John Maynard Keynes. It states outright that Keynes's past life was literally Qin Shi Huang, the despotic emperor who built the Great Wall of China. The book uses this spiritual genealogy to suggest his economic theories inherently involve a desire for massive state power and ultimately the enslavement of the people to build these grand state-directed projects. Section 5. True cause of the subprime crisis. So the crucial point here is how this book reevaluates the subprime mortgage crisis. Now, mainstream narratives usually call this a massive failure of unregulated capitalism, right? Well, the text completely disagrees. It argues that politicians were seeking left-wing votes by implementing what were essentially Marxist-style redistributive policies. According to the source, by pushing loans onto low-income earners who realistically couldn't afford them, the government engineered an inevitable collapse. The result, the book claims, wasn't a failure of capitalism at all, but the implosion of a flawed, socialist-leaning policy.
Section 6. Protect the value of freedom. The book concludes with a stern warning about just how fragile our liberties really are. To prevent society from quite literally dying, the text insists that laws must be kept to an absolute minimum, and most importantly, freedom of expression has got to be fiercely protected. It specifically cites the absolute necessity of protecting media outlets like the Liberty magazine, arguing that the moment a society becomes afraid to speak out, well, that's when a nation begins its descent into totalitarianism.
Which brings us to the ultimate question posed by this highly unique text. Will Japan, and society at large, recognize the hubris of big government and fiercely protect its freedom? Or will it be seduced by utopian promises, only to silently slip into totalitarianism? Whether you view this as profound spiritual insight or a radical fringe theory, it definitely forces us to look at the intersection of economic policy, human ego, and personal liberty in a completely new light. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this leaves you with plenty to think about.